The room was loud with clinking glasses and laughter, and for a moment, standing in the doorway of that banquet hall with my daughter's hand in mine, I almost believed this night was going to be fine. 40 people. Round tables draped in ivory linen. Candles everywhere. Centerpieces tall enough to block the person sitting across from you. My father-in-law, Reginald, standing at the head of the room in a dark suit that cost more than my first car, holding a glass of red wine like a prop he had rehearsed with. My mother-in-law, Dorothea, beside him in burgundy silk, pearl earrings catching the light every time she tilted her head to laugh at something only she found funny. The kind of laughter that is not really laughter at all. It is a performance. Everything with Dorothea is a performance. I had dressed carefully that night. I always dressed carefully for Winthrop events. Not because I cared what they thought of my appearance, but because I had learned years ago that showing up underdressed was the fastest way to hand them something to talk about instead of paying attention to anything else. My burgundy wrap dress, low heels, hair pinned back, deliberate, controlled. My daughter, Soleil, was beside me in a navy blue dress she had picked out herself. She was 12 years old, and she had spent 45 minutes getting ready, checking the mirror more than once, asking me quietly whether she looked okay. I told her she looked beautiful. I meant it completely. She had her father's cheekbones and my stubbornness, and when she walked into a room, she had this way of taking it in first, reading the space, before deciding how much of herself to offer it. I always thought that quality was a kind of intelligence. Most people in this family read it as a deficiency. Reginald tapped his glass at 8:47. I remember the exact time because I had glanced at my watch 2 minutes earlier, calculating whether Soleil could survive another hour before she hit exhaustion. She had school the next morning. I had already planned our exit. 1 more hour, maybe 90 minutes, and then we would slip out quietly the way we always did, and I would let Soleil fall asleep in the car and carry her from the garage the way I used to when she was small, before she got too heavy for it, before she started insisting she was fine. She was awake. She did not need to be carried. But when the room went quiet and Reginald began to speak, I felt something shift in the air. Not the normal shift of a party winding toward its end. Something different. Something with weight. Tonight, he said, his voice carrying the measured confidence of a man who has spent decades being listened to. We celebrate 35 years. 35 years of this family. Of what we built. Of what we intend to leave behind. There was applause. Genuine, warm applause. Even I clapped. Legacy, he continued, is not just about property or finances. It is about choosing the right people to carry what you have built. It is about being honest, even when honesty is uncomfortable. I noticed Dorothea nodding slowly beside him, and something about the practiced precision of that nod made my stomach tighten. Which is why tonight is not only a celebration. Tonight, we make something official. He gestured across the room, and all 40 heads turned in one direction. Toward the cousin. Toward Prescott. Prescott was 16. The son of Reginald's younger brother. A boy with sharp cheekbones and a practiced smile who had been sitting at the center table all evening like he already knew something the rest of us did not. He stood up slowly when Reginald gestured to him. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man receiving something he had been promised. That particular ease of someone collecting what they were always told was already theirs. Prescott represents exactly what this family needs going forward, Reginald said. Drive. Clarity. Natural leadership.
He understands this family's name and what it carries. The applause came again, louder this time. Then Reginald cleared his throat. We have made decisions tonight about how certain things will be structured. The family property. The business shares. The trust. These things will pass to Prescott when the time is appropriate. He is prepared for that. More applause. The business associates at the far table were nodding. The 2 lawyers seated near the entrance were making small, satisfied movements that told me this was not a surprise to them. This had been drafted already. This was an announcement, not a discussion. And then Reginald paused. His eyes moved across the room with that particular slowness that I had seen him use in difficult business meetings, the pause designed to give weight to what follows, to make the room lean in. Not every child, he said carefully, is built for responsibility. The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. The camera in my mind panned slowly. Past the guests in their fine clothes. Past the candles. Past Prescott's easy smile. And it landed on Soleil. My daughter, sitting very still in her navy blue dress, her hands folded in her lap, her face doing something I had never seen it do before. Not crying. Not even close to crying. Just going quiet in a way that was deeper than quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when someone processes something they were not prepared for. When something they suspected but hoped was wrong turns out to be exactly as bad as they feared. Her smile was gone. I felt it move through my chest like a current. And I heard myself say, very calmly, "You are right." The room turned to me. Reginald blinked. And that is where I will take you back. Back to the beginning. Because none of what happened that night makes sense without understanding what came before it. And what came before it had been building for a long, long time. If you're still listening, drop where you're watching from the comments. And if you're new here, subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I married into the Winthrop family 9 years ago. My husband, Conrad, is a good man, patient, thoughtful. He loves Soleil in a way that is completely without condition, and that has always been one of the things I have loved most about him. But loving your family and being willing to confront them are two profoundly different things, and for most of our marriage, Conrad sat in the space between those two facts, hoping the distance would eventually close on its own. It never did. The Winthrops are a family that organizes itself around performance. Not cruelty, not exactly. Nothing as simple as that. It is more like they have built an entire internal economy around the idea of being impressive, and everything, every dinner, every holiday, every school result, every career update gets fed into that economy and evaluated. Silently. Constantly. Children are not exempt from that economy. If anything, they are its primary subject. Some families do not raise children. They rank them like exam results. And then they wonder why some of those children grow up with a permanent low hum of not enoughness running through everything they do. From the time Soleil was small, she was measured against Prescott. Prescott, who is 4 years older, who learned early to perform confidence the way his father performed it, who walked into rooms announcing himself in the particular way that the Winthrops recognized and rewarded. Loud questions. Bold opinions. An eagerness to sit at the adult table and insert himself into business conversations he barely understood. The Winthrops called it initiative. I called it theater. But it was the right kind of theater for that audience, and that was what mattered to them. Soleil did not do that. When Soleil was 7, she spent 3 weeks building a detailed map of an imaginary country, complete with a political system, a geography, a climate, and a language she had partially invented herself, with its own phonetic rules and about 40 words she had written out in a notebook. She showed it to Dorothea at Christmas that year, carefully carrying it in a folder she had decorated herself. She was clearly nervous, clearly hoping. I watched her from across the room, this 7-year-old in a red velvet dress, holding a folder with both hands like it was something breakable. Dorothea looked at it for approximately 4 seconds. "That is very imaginative," she said. And then she turned to Prescott. "Prescott, tell everyone what you said at your debate competition. Your father told me, and it was absolutely remarkable." I watched Soleil fold her folder closed. Quietly, without comment. I said nothing. I told myself it was a small moment. I told myself Dorothea did not mean anything by it. I told myself this is just how some people are, and Soleil was resilient, and it would not leave a mark. I was wrong about that last part. These things leave marks. They're just quiet about it. The year Soleil was 9, she won a regional writing competition. Not a participation ribbon. First place, out of students up to age 14. Her teacher, a woman named Ms. Caldwell, who I will be grateful to for the rest of my life, called me separately to tell me how unusual Soleil's submission was. She told me the judges had commented specifically on Soleil's use of structure and imagery. She told me they had asked whether Soleil had external coaching or tutoring because the level of craft was not typical for her age group. She did not. Every word was hers. I told the Winthrops at Sunday dinner that week. Conrad was proud. He told his parents the way you tell people good news, openly, expecting them to meet it. Reginald said, writing. That is nice. Is it a practical skill? Dorothea said, Prescott has been shortlisted for a junior business accelerator program. Very competitive intake. Not many spots, and they specifically look for leadership presence. She looked at Conrad. Did we tell you? We are very proud. That was the whole conversation about Soleil's first place finish. Conrad caught my eye across the table. His expression said, I know. I noticed. I am sorry. And I gave him the small nod that meant I know you know. Let it go. But I did not let it go. I stored it. The way you store things you are not yet sure what to do with. Those moments stacked up over the years like stones in a wall. Soleil got thoughtful lectures. Prescott got expensive gifts. When Prescott bought his first stock at 15, Reginald framed the receipt and put it on the wall of his study. When Soleil placed in a state science fair at 11, Dorothea said, That is wonderful, sweetheart, and then asked Conrad whether he had spoken to the accountant about restructuring the trust. When Soleil was 10, Dorothea sat across from her at a family lunch and said, entirely without hostility, with the casual confidence of someone delivering an obvious truth, You are a quiet child, Soleil. Leadership requires presence. You have to learn to fill a room.
Soleil nodded politely.
She was 10 years old, and she nodded politely, and she said, Yes, ma'am. And she went back to her food. In the car on the way home, she asked me what Grandma Dorothea meant. I chose my words carefully. She means that she values a certain kind of confidence, I said. The kind that announces itself. But that is not the only kind there is. Some people fill a room by being the loudest thing in it. Other people fill a room just by being fully present in it. Both are real. Not everyone can see both. Soleil was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Can Grandma Dorothea see both? I kept my eyes on the road. Not yet, I said. She seemed to accept that. But I noticed after that day, she stopped bringing her work to family dinners. She stopped showing Dorothea anything. She still came, still sat, still answered questions politely. But she had closed a door, and she had closed it so quietly that no one except me seemed to notice it had shut. She had learned something that day. Not what I would have wanted her to learn. But she had learned it completely. The months before the anniversary party, I started paying different attention to how Reginald spoke about the family's future. The language shifted. Vague references to legacy became specific references to structure. He started dropping Prescott's name into conversations about the business the way you drop a name that belongs there naturally, without explanation, without introduction, as if the decision had already been made and everyone simply had not been informed yet. I paid attention. I said nothing. I was still, at that point, operating on the assumption that whatever they did with family money was a separate matter from my daughter's value as a person. I was finishing that assumption just in time. 2 months before the party, an envelope arrived addressed to our household from the Ardwell National Academy for Advanced Studies. It was a formal letter confirming Soleil's acceptance into their 2-year gifted development program. She had been evaluated the previous spring through a referral from her school's academic coordinator, a woman who had been quietly watching Soleil for over a year and had finally said to me at a parent conference, I need to tell you something about your daughter that I think you may not fully know yet. Soleil had scored in the 97th percentile nationally across a comprehensive cognitive and creative assessment battery. The letter used words like exceptional processing profile and rare convergence of analytical and narrative intelligence. It invited her to an enrollment ceremony the following fall. I sat with that letter for a very long time. Then I made a decision that at the time felt like protection, and later felt like strategy, and in the end was probably both. I decided not to announce it at a family dinner. I had watched what happened when Soleil brought her real self to those people. I had watched their eyes slide past her achievements toward whatever Prescott was doing. I had watched a 7-year-old fold a folder closed and learned to stop hoping. I did not want this, the most significant recognition of her ability she had ever received, to be handled the way everything else had been handled. So I waited. But what I did not wait on was documentation. I sent a detailed email to Reginald and Dorothea 3 weeks before the anniversary party. I attached the full acceptance letter. I attached Soleil's assessment results, broken down by category, with the national comparison data clearly visible. I attached the program overview from the academy, including the acceptance rate, which was under 4%. I told them I was sharing this privately first because I wanted them to have the full picture before any public occasion. I asked if they had questions. I asked if they wanted to talk. They never responded. I sent a follow-up 10 days later. I kept it brief. I said I wanted to make sure the first message had gone through. I asked again whether they had any thoughts. No response. I sent a third message the week before the party. One line. Please let me know whether you received my previous emails regarding Soleil's acceptance to the Ardwell program. Nothing. I sat with that silence and I understood it completely. They had read it. I knew they had read it. Reginald answered emails the same day, always. It was one of his points of pride. They had read it, processed what it meant, and decided, together, that it did not change anything. That it was easier to proceed as planned and hope I would either not notice or not act on it. That was their second large mistake. The first was sending the message with Soleil sitting in the room. When we arrived at the party that night, I walked in knowing everything I needed to know. Conrad was beside me, his hand at the small of my back. He knew about Soleil's acceptance. He did not know about the emails to his parents. I had not told him yet, because I wanted to see what the evening revealed before I introduced that particular fact into the equation. By 8:47, I had seen enough. When Reginald said, "Not every child is built for responsibility," and every person in that room understood who he was referencing, and my daughter's face went quiet in the way that broke something loose in me, I was already standing before I fully registered that I had moved. "You are right," I said. Calmly. Clearly. The way you say something when you are not uncertain about what comes next. Reginald's shoulders relaxed. That small, satisfied softening of a man who hears agreement where he expected resistance. That was his third mistake. "You are absolutely right," I said again, and the room was completely still. Not every child is built for responsibility. Some children are built for something larger than responsibility. Some children are built for distinction. I paused for exactly long enough. Which is why I find it particularly interesting that the only child in this room tonight who has been formally recognized at a national level, the only child who scored in the 97th percentile on a competitive academic assessment and earned a place in one of the most selective gifted programs in this country, with an acceptance rate under 4%, is not Prescott. The room did not gasp. It went the kind of still that comes before a sound, not after it. It is Soleil. I watched it move through the table closest to me first, the guests shifting, exchanging glances. I watched it reach the back of the room in waves. I watched Prescott's confident expression dissolve into genuine confusion, and I want to be clear, I have never held anything against that boy. He was 16, and he had been handed an identity by adults who should have known better. What was done to Soleil was not Prescott's fault. But it was absolutely Reginald's. And Dorothea's. I watched Dorothea's face go careful in the specific way it goes careful when she is recalculating. And I watched Reginald's face do something I had never seen it do in 9 years. It went still in a way that was not composure. It was the stillness of a man who has just realized, in public, that he miscalculated. "I sent documentation," I said. The full acceptance letter. Her assessment results with national percentile comparisons. The complete program overview. I sent it to both of you 3 weeks before tonight. And again 10 days ago. And again last week. I let that land. I asked if you had questions. I asked if you wanted to discuss it. I did not receive a single response. The woman named Harriet, a longtime professional acquaintance of Reginald's, put her glass down on the table with a deliberateness that was its own kind of statement. "So I want to be very clear about what happened here tonight," I continued. You did not exclude Soleil from your vision of this family's future because she lacks ability. You excluded her because her ability does not look the way you expected ability to look. Because she is quiet where you wanted loud. Because she builds in private where you wanted performance. Those are two very different things. And one of them says nothing about her. It says everything about you. Dorothea's mouth opened. I did not stop. And one more thing, and then I am finished. I looked directly at Reginald, who was still standing, who had not sat down, who seemed not to have decided yet whether sitting would be worse than staying on his feet. She does not need your inheritance. She does not need your approval. She does not need to sit at one more table in this family wondering whether she is enough. Because people who evaluate these things for a living have already given her an answer in writing. She is more than enough. She was always more than enough. You simply chose not to read the letter. The silence that followed was the loudest room I have ever been in. It was Conrad who moved first. He pushed back his chair slowly. He stood up. He did not look at his parents. He looked at me for one long moment, and then he looked at Soleil, and the thing that moved across his face was not anger exactly. It was more like clarity. The particular expression of a man who has been holding two things in tension for a very long time and has finally set one of them down. My daughter, he said, and his voice was completely steady, is the most remarkable person I have ever known. If she is not part of the future you are planning, then neither are we. He reached across the table and took Soleil's hand. She looked up at him. And then she looked at me. She did not cry. My daughter did not cry. Her eyes went bright and wide and full of something that was too large for any single word, and she held her father's hand. And for a moment the room with its 40 people and its ivory linen and its candles and its business associates and its lawyers simply did not exist. There were only 3 of us. Harriet stood up and began to clap. Slowly at first. Then fully. Her hands meeting cleanly, deliberately, in the kind of applause that is not entertainment but endorsement. 3 other guests joined within seconds. Then 2 more. Reginald sat down. Dorothea studied the tablecloth as though it contained instructions she had not previously needed. We left shortly after. I did not make a scene of leaving. I simply collected my purse, helped Soleil with her jacket, and walked out of that banquet hall with my husband and my daughter. Reginald did not stop us. Dorothea said, "Nadia," when I passed her chair, just my name, nothing else, and I looked at her for one moment and kept walking. The drive home was quiet in the way that quiet is not empty but full. Soleil sat in the back seat with her seatbelt on and her hands in her lap, looking out the window at the city moving past in streaks of orange and white light. Conrad drove with both hands on the wheel. We did not need to talk yet. Somewhere near the bridge, Soleil said, "You really meant that?" All of it. I turned around in my seat to look at her. Every single word, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Even the part about not needing anything from them? Especially that part. She looked out the window again. The lights moved across her face. "I already knew I did not need it," she said, very quietly. "I just did not know if you knew." I had to look away for a second. Conrad reached over and put his hand over mine on the center console, and I held on to that. There is something I have thought about many times since that night. Favoritism, the kind that lives inside families and goes unnamed for years, does not always announce itself loudly. It does not always look like cruelty. Sometimes it looks like a nod that lasts a beat too short. An eye that slides past. An achievement acknowledged on its way to something else. A door that a child quietly learns to stop knocking on. It builds in layers so thin that each one alone is dismissible. And it is only when you stack them all up and hold them to the light that you see what they have built together. What they tried to do that night was erase a child. Not with violence. Not with explicit malice. With an audience. With precedent. With a room full of witnesses and a speech designed to make the erasure feel like good sense, like honesty, like simply naming what everyone already knew. They believed that if they said it in public, in front of people who respected them, it would become simply the way things were. They did not account for me. It is one thing to be wrong. It is another thing entirely to be wrong in front of 40 witnesses. Who watched you ignore documented evidence before standing up to make the announcement anyway? Some people clap the loudest for one child and never notice the other one is listening. They assume the quiet child is not paying attention. They do not understand that the quiet child is paying closer attention than anyone else in the room. That the quiet child has been taking notes since age 7. That the quiet child who folds her folder and says nothing is not giving up. She is waiting. Soleil did not need that night to know her own worth. She already knew it. What changed that night was not her knowledge of herself. What changed was the public record. The same people who watched the insult now watched the answer. The same room that heard "not every child is built for responsibility" also heard what I said next. That is not nothing. That matters in a way that lasts. She entered the Ardwell program the following fall. On her first formal evaluation, her lead instructor called me and said that Soleil had a quality she did not often see in students. She said Soleil was curious in the particular way that is not about performing curiosity for other people. She said Soleil asked questions that the instructor herself had to think about. I thanked her and did not tell her how long we had been waiting for someone to say that out loud. On the drive home from that first evaluation, I glanced at Soleil in the rearview mirror. She was looking out the window at nothing in particular, or at everything. With her, it is often hard to tell. And she was smiling. The small, private kind that does not need an audience. The one that has always been her real one. "Good day?" I asked. "Really good," she said. That was enough. The Winthrops and I eventually settled into a version of coexistence. There was distance for a while, the kind that Reginald probably called disappointment and Dorothea probably called giving us space to reflect. Conrad did not chase it. He had said what he needed to say, and he did not feel the need to say it again. Eventually there were dinners again. Holidays. The ordinary structure of extended family reassembled itself the way it usually does, imperfectly, with adjustments, with certain topics that everyone silently agrees not to revisit. But something had changed permanently in the architecture of those rooms. Something had been said that could not be unsaid. And Soleil moved through those spaces differently now. Not louder. Not performing anything. Just fully present in the way that only becomes possible when you have stopped needing the room to confirm something for you. They tried to erase her in public. What they did instead was hand me the stage. And I had been patient long enough to know exactly what to do with it.